She arranged every detail as if it were her own heart being placed there. The embroidered pillowcases, the bedspread lined with the scent of lavender, the picture frame with the photo he had never seen. She wasn't in the contract, but she was in every corner of that room. Her dress wasn't a wedding dress, it was the uniform of someone who had cared for, dreamed of, and been forgotten. On the first night, the footsteps she heard coming up the stairs weren't hers, and the kiss that echoed in the silence was given to someone else, right there where before there had only been her tenderness. The room was perfect, but not for her. It was for someone who had never put their soul into any detail. He never realized. Not when he felt that there was something familiar in the touch of the flowers, not when he noticed that the light came through the window exactly the way he liked it. She knew everything about him, his quirks, his silences, his night dreams, but he only learned her name too late. And when he did, it was too late to ask for forgiveness, because the room was still there. Only the perfume had gone, and the woman he let down the stairs that night was the same woman who, years later, would teach him what silent love is, and the price of not recognizing it when it is still there. If this story has already caught your attention in the first few seconds, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It makes all the difference in helping more people find stories like this. She arrived 2 days before the ceremony. The mansion was huge, white as the sheets she had been washing since she was 17. The woman at the agency said that all she had to do was tidy up the groom's room, nothing more. But she knew, from the first step on that expensive carpet, that nothing there would be simple. The room was on the second floor, with a window facing the garden, light coming in from the side. It was the kind of space that told stories without needing voices, and she understood right away that she needed to make that story perfect, even if it wasn't hers. She placed flowers on the nightstand, not knowing if he liked lilies. She ironed the bedclothes, listening to the laughter coming from downstairs. It was her fiancé, the owner of the room, the man she had never seen up close but who she had learned to imagine in the details. He liked silence. She realized this when she saw that the radio in the bathroom had been off for days. He liked organization. Each piece hung with the exact space in the closet. He liked blue, because everything there was blue, even the empty picture frame, as if waiting for a story that had yet to be told. She shouldn't have cared, but she did. A lot. She folded each towel as if it were a gift. She dusted the furniture with care as if she were cherishing memories. She put a note on the mirror, unsigned of course, saying, "You deserve a beautiful beginning." She knew he would never know it was her, and yet she wanted him to feel that someone had truly cared for that space, that someone had cared about that first night, that someone had dreamed for him, even in silence. When it was time for the ceremony, she stayed in the back, as requested. The bride arrived laughing, beautiful, confident. She got out of the car embracing her own privileges. She was a woman made of certainties. She, on the other hand, was made of waiting. She waited for the day to end. She waited for the last guest to leave. She waited for the light on the stairs to go out, and when the clock struck 11:30, she went up just to check if everything was ready. The bedroom door was ajar. The blue bedspread was stretched out as she had left it. The note still on the mirror. It was at that moment that she heard the footsteps. They weren't hers. It was him, and someone else. The muffled laughter, the door closing, the beginning of something that didn't include her. He walked down the stairs in silence, without making a sound, without looking back. And in the kitchen, before turning off the light, he saw a petal on the floor, one of those that she herself had scattered. She didn't pick it up. She left it there, like a trace of something that never began, and yet it hurt as if it had ended. She began to get used to the two worlds she lived in at the same time, the world of shadows and the world of hidden gestures. During the day, she was the employee who walked quickly, looked at the floor and said, "Yes, ma'am," with her head down. No one greeted her by name. It was always the lady or the cleaning lady, and she accepted it, not because she thought it was fair, but because it was the price of being close to him, even from afar. At night, when the lights in the hall went out, and the footsteps became whispers, he would look for her. Sometimes with a note left next to the kettle, sometimes with a lingering look when they passed each other in the hallway, sometimes just with a silence that only she could decipher. He was kind in those moments. He apologized for not being able to do it anymore. He said that his life was complicated, that the family expected other choices, that it was just for now, that one day everything would be different. And she, even though she had heard these phrases before from other mouths, believed them, because he said it with his eyes, and his eyes were too beautiful to lie. It was on one of those nights that he gave her a secret gift, a simple silver chain with a blue stone in the center. "It reminds me of you," he said, "clear but hard to reach." She kept the chain so carefully that she never wore it. She kept it in a cardboard box, among photos of her mother and old letters. It was like keeping something sacred, as if wearing it would tarnish its meaning, and yet every time her chest hurt she would open the box and touch the stone, just to remember that for a few seconds in the world, someone had seen beauty in her. But the days were getting harder. His mother-in-law, who didn't even know she was a mother-in-law yet but already spoke as if she were, began to notice something strange. He was asking why that maid was walking around the house so much. She complained that the floor of the stairs always smelled of lavender, that her son's sheets seemed to be arranged with flowers. "She's getting too involved in the rooms," she was once heard saying. And that night, she knew she had to disappear, not physically, but disappear from his presence. Be even more of a shadow, even more of a silence, even more of a secret. And that hurt. It hurt more than any contempt. It was during this time that he moved away, little by little, like someone who moves furniture out of the living room without making a sound. He stopped leaving notes. He stopped showing up in the early hours of the morning. He no longer looked for her in the garden. He no longer made up excuses to see her in the kitchen. And she, as if she knew the end was coming, but pretended. Not to, continued to wipe the same marble. She made the same bed. She cleaned the same wine glasses that he was now drinking with another woman who didn't know about the hot coffee with cinnamon, who didn't know about the blue stone, who never saw him in his pajamas with his eyes downcast, begging her not to leave. The new girl was pretty, loud, confident. She arrived with her heels clicking firmly on the floor. She brought friends, parties, and promises, and little by little she, the other woman, disappeared even from the mirror. But what he didn't know was that she no longer cried in the basement. She had learned to cry inside, to feel the pain hidden in the corners of her eyes, to pretend that it was all just work, because it was easier to accept being invisible than to admit that she still loved him. And he seemed increasingly distant from the man who had once asked her to stay. Time didn't just push him away from her. It transformed him into someone she no longer recognized. And yet every day after work she went up to his room, just to fix his pillow, just to feel that there was still something of hers there, even if it was just the touch of the pillowcase, even if it was just the memory of a kiss that shouldn't have happened. With each passing week, the wedding became more visible, more inevitable, more cruel to those who watched it all from behind the scenes. The preparations took over the mansion like an elegant avalanche, boxes with embossed invitations, tastings with dishes she would never know how to pronounce, flower arrangements that cost more than a whole month's salary. She watched it all silently, like someone watching a movie she hadn't been cast in, even though she was the character she felt the most for. He would pass her in the hallway in a hurry, his eyes always busy, as if he had already learned to pretend he didn't know her. But it was only at night, in the depths of his eyes, that she saw the man who still hesitated. The same man who had grabbed her by the waist one day and asked her not to leave. Now he didn't ask her anymore. Not with words, not with gestures. On the eve of the wedding, she was called to tidy up the couple's bedroom. The groom and his future wife would stay there after the ceremony. They said it was important for everything to be perfect, and it was at that moment that she understood that the end would not be just silence. It would be a ritual, and she would be the hand that would prepare. The altar for another love to take the place of the one that could never be lived. She went upstairs with the sheet folded against her chest, as if carrying a weight she didn't want to name. She opened the door slowly, as if entering a tomb, and stopped for a moment. The room still smelled like him. It still had the light that she loved. There was still the empty picture frame on the dresser. She took a deep breath. She laid clean sheets on the bed. She folded each corner with surgical precision. She placed fresh flowers, the same color as the stone he had given her. She opened the window to let the sun shine in, and finally, as if sealing a pact, she left the note on the mirror again. The same one. The one that said, "You deserve a beautiful beginning." But this time she signed it with her own initial, a small, intimate, silent gesture, but one that said, "I was here. I loved you." As she was going down, she passed him in the hallway. He was holding his jacket, sweating. Nervously, and looked at her for a second longer than he should have. She looked away, but before turning the corner she heard his voice, almost a whisper. "It was you, wasn't it?" She didn't answer. She kept walking, because there was no point anymore, because he only knew how to ask when everything was already done, when she had already left her love in that bed that would not be hers. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat on the basement floor with the little box open on her lap, looking at the silver chain. She didn't cry, she didn't smile. She simply existed within a calm, bitter pain without screaming, like someone who learns that loving in silence hurts more than never having loved at all. And yet, she didn't regret it. Because deep down, even though the world didn't see it, even though no one spoke her name in that house, she knew that it was there, in that absence, that true love existed. Not in the vows, not in the party, but in the gesture of someone who tidied a room with tears and left a petal on the floor as a farewell. On the morning of the wedding, the mansion began to move before sunrise. Cars arrived with flowers, sweets, dresses, and photographers. The house throbbed like an anxious body, full of forced smiles and empty hugs. She, in a new uniform and with trembling hands, received instructions as if she were part of the furniture. Be careful with the veil. Don't touch the bouquet. Iron with more steam. No one looked her in the eyes. No one asked how she was. Because for everyone she was just the background of the scene, the woman who appears without being noticed. But inside her, everything was burning. Every corner of the house seemed to scream memories. Every staircase, every mirror, every pillow cleaned with such care. Everything reminded her of what never was. At 10:20 in the morning he passed her by. He was well-groomed, elegant, handsome as ever. She knew his heart was heavy. She knew the way he frowned when he wanted to appear confident. She knew his silence better than any music, and in that moment all she wanted was for him to say, "Come with me." That was it, 2 words, but he walked right past her, as if he had nothing to lose, as if there was no longer any trace of the woman who loved him silently. During the ceremony, she stood upstairs listening to the applause and laughter from afar. With each word the priest said, with each toast outside, she pressed her fingers against her own skin to remind herself that she was still alive. When the fireworks went off, she shivered in the darkness, and then, when it seemed like it was all over, the event coordinator called her over with a mechanical smile. "Now, my dear, is the most important time. Make sure their room is perfect. They'll be going up in a little while." She didn't cry. She just walked up, slowly. Each step was a battle. When she opened the door, the late afternoon light hit the blue bedspread. Everything was silent, as if the world was waiting for something. She didn't change anything, she didn't touch anything, she just went to the mirror. The note with her initial was still there. She thought about taking it down. She thought about hiding it. But no, she left it as it was. Because it wasn't her problem to see the truth or not anymore, it was his. And she knew. One day, he would remember. He would remember the girl who cleaned the corners that no one could see. The girl who kept the pain in her throat so as not to disturb other people's parties. The girl who tidied the place where another woman would sleep, with the smell of longing that wasn't hers. And that would be enough. Because true love doesn't always end with happy endings. Sometimes it ends with closed doors, with silence on the lips and with a forgotten petal on the floor. that one day someone will find and won't understand where it came from. But she will know, and that is enough. The party was long. The guests laughed loudly, toasted and stumbled over their own exaggerations, while the mansion's garden filled with laughter that said nothing. Down below, under the same roof, she washed the last crystal glasses with her wrinkled, cold fingers. Each glass was a memory, each piece of china, a piece of everything she would never have. The bride's dress hanging on the coat rack in the master suite was as white as the lie he had repeated so many times. She had come to believe that she could be loved in silence and still be respected, but hidden. Love always dies of hunger, and that night she was starving for dignity. When they both went up to the bedroom, she was no longer there. She left everything clean, the towel folded over the chair, her perfume light in the air. She went down to the basement and closed the door slowly. She sat on the cement floor and remained there for hours, just listening to the muffled sounds from upstairs. Laughter, footsteps, doors. The bed she had carefully made was now occupied by another story, and that was okay. She no longer expected to be remembered, but the next day something unexpected happened. He came down alone, earlier than usual. He went to the kitchen, saw that she was not there, and asked the housekeeper for her. "He went away," she heard as an answer. "He said he had to take care of his sick mother, but he left this here." It was the little box, the one that held the silver chain with the blue stone. Beside it, a folded piece of paper with a few handwritten words. "Thank you for making me believe, even if just for a moment, that I could be seen." He stood there still with the little box in his hands. He looked at the object as if holding onto a time that would never return. The blue stone, so simple, seemed to shine in a way that made him breathe deeper. And there, in the middle of the kitchen, where she had so often silenced her pain, he felt, for the first time, what it was like to lose something he had never truly had. He didn't cry, but his silence weighed, like tears. The girl who had always been there, invisible, had left, and with her the only piece of him that was real went away. In the days that followed, he tried to find her. He asked the agency for her address. He called numbers that didn't answer. He discreetly asked the staff, but no one knew anything. She disappeared like well-kept secrets. She left only traces in the details. A corner of the picture frame that was too clean, a handkerchief forgotten in the wrong drawer. The note on the mirror, which he never had the courage to take down, and over time the house was filled with new furniture, vibrant colors, changes planned by his new wife. But he kept sleeping on the left side of the bed, facing the window, as if he still expected to see her figure passing by in the morning light. And every time he saw petals on the floor, from any flower, in any corner, he stopped, because now he knew there were things that are born in the dark, and that shine brighter when they are not seen. Months passed. The routine of the house continued at a ceremonial pace. Perfect-looking dinners, laughter at high windows, well-framed photos to show the world a marriage without cracks. The new wife took control of everything with cruel ease, decorating the rooms with impersonal touches, as if erasing old traces without knowing there was history there. But he could never erase what he could not name. He slept badly. He would wake up in the middle of the night with the feeling that something was missing, something light, soft, silent. He began to walk around the house more, alone. He would go to the kitchen in the early hours of the morning, as if searching for a smell. He would sit on the bench where she used to rest while the tea was heating, and when he touched a towel stored at the bottom of the drawer, he would feel his fingertips tremble. He was beginning to understand that there are memories that do not scream. They only wait to be felt. One afternoon, while organizing documents in the office, she found an old notebook with notes about the house. It was a kind of diary for the household staff, lists, reminders, schedules. She had left short sentences there, simple things like, "Change the flowers in the garden before 7. Sir, do you like your pillow lower? Be careful with the light from the window at noon, it hurts his eyes." Each note was a delicacy, a thoughtful gesture, a gesture of love that he never noticed because he was too busy being loved in public. He closed the notebook carefully, as if touching something he missed. His new wife asked him what it was, and he replied that it was just old paper, and he smiled, lying with his mouth, but shouting with his chest. At the same time, she was moving on with her life in another city. She got a job at a small roadside hotel. She washed sheets, served coffee, and kept her eyes downcast. Her colleagues said she looked sad, but she didn't respond. She just smiled softly, like someone who keeps a story in their heart and doesn't want it to escape their lips. At night, she would sit by the window looking at the sky. She thought about him, not with anger, not with desire, just with a resigned tenderness, like someone who knows that certain people we love only on the inside, without pressure, without a name, without space. One of the guests once commented that there was something about her that reminded her of old perfume. "You seem made of memories," she said. She smiled. Because it was true. She was made of moments no one saw, of glances no one registered, of words that were never said. But still, she resisted. Because loving and not being seen did not destroy her. It shaped her, made her lighter, wiser, and quieter. Meanwhile, he began to lose himself in his own home. He forgot appointments, avoided dinners, spent hours locked in his room with the empty picture frame on the dresser. His new wife complained, fought, screamed, and he, silent, just looked out the window. Because he understood now, some presences only make sense when they become absence, and her absence hurt more than any words she could have said. Because he had never really heard her voice. But now she screamed in every corner of the house in the silence that only he could hear. It was during a business trip that everything inside him broke. He was in a luxurious hotel, the kind where everything seems rehearsed, with corridors that are too long and rooms that smell of expensive disinfectant. The bed was large, the sheets were impeccable, the service was efficient, but something there bothered him deeply. Maybe the excess of order, maybe the polite coldness, or maybe the fantasy that no one would remember his name without looking at his file. On the second night, he couldn't sleep. He opened the window and stared at the emptiness of the city below. And suddenly, he remembered the blue stone, the one he never saw again, the one he himself had left hidden away, without the courage to touch. That morning, her entire face came to mind, not just her sad eyes, but her small gestures, the way she adjusted her apron before speaking, the way he spread the sheets as if they were wings, the absurd delicacy of someone who never demanded love, but offered his own as if it were natural. He spent the rest of the trip with a strange taste in his mouth. When he returned home, he ignored his wife's enthusiastic welcome. He went straight up to his room and opened the bottom drawer of the dresser, where he had kept the box with the chain. It was there, untouched. The blue stone seemed even brighter. He picked up the object, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at it for minutes. And there, alone, he felt something he had never felt before: shame. Not only for having hidden it, but for having let her believe she was not worthy, for having turned love into a task, passion into service, and affection into an invisible routine. He began to change after that. At first, he changed silently. He stopped coldly correcting the employees. He started to straighten his own pillow. He started leaving thank you notes in the kitchen. He tried, somehow, to reconstruct what he had ignored. But it was too late. Because there are feelings that cannot be repeated, even if one wants to. His wife, noticing the change, reacted with frustration. "You are different," she would say, and he would simply reply, "It's just that now I see things that I didn't see before." But he never explained what they were. One day, in a desperate attempt to find her, he called the agency that had hired her years before again. The attendant looked through the files, sighed, and said, "She didn't leave any more details. Just a note with an address that may no longer be hers." He wrote it down. It was a small, simple town, nothing special, but to him it seemed like the only place where time could still be touched. He decided to go, without telling anyone. He got in the car at the end of a rainy afternoon and drove for hours. He didn't know if he was looking for redemption or just a look that would tell him there was still a chance. He arrived tired, with sweaty hands and a heavy heart like never before. He stopped in front of the little hotel that had been indicated. It was modest, with wooden windows and flowery curtains. He took a deep breath. He went in and asked for her. The receptionist smiled in surprise. "Mrs. Clara? She works here, yes. She's in the back room." He felt his body tremble. The name he had never said out loud, now filled him. He waited there, his eyes fixed on the door that would soon open. And when she appeared, holding a bucket and wearing the same smooth shoes as always, everything froze. She saw him. She stopped. And for the first time in a long time, he lowered his eyes. Because he understood. There, in that moment, it wasn't him who deserved words. It was her. But she remained silent. Just like before. Just like always. And in that silence he heard everything. Everything he had never heard. Everything he had missed. Everything that was finally reaching him. It was on a business trip that everything in him began to fall apart. The hotel was impeccable, the sheets cold and expensive, the service as silent as she used to be. And maybe that was it. The silence. It was in that silence that she returned. Not with a voice, but with a memory. He remembered the way she cleaned the tables without making a sound, the way she looked at him without waiting for a response, the tenderness in her gestures that he pretended not to see. That night, he opened the window and stood there, looking at the city, listening to the muffled noise of the traffic and feeling the weight of what he had let slip. Back at the mansion, the chain with the blue stone was still in the bottom drawer, inside the little brown box. He picked it up and for the first time closed his eyes when he touched it. There was no perfume, no music, just an emptiness that screamed in silence. He sat on the edge of the bed and understood right there what he had never wanted to admit. He hid her because he was afraid of being seen with her, because she showed him the real him, and that terrified him. His wife, now surrounded by new decorations and planned parties, seemed to live in another time. And him? He was stuck in the past that he had never had the courage to live. He tried to find her. He went back to the agency. He called old numbers. He heard from an attendant that there was a forgotten note with an address in a small town. Nothing certain, but enough. He drove for hours, alone, with the chain in his pocket. He arrived tired, sweaty, with a heavy heart. It was a simple hotel, flowery curtains, old wooden floors. He asked for her. "Clara? She's in the back, changing the sheets." The answer came like a sweet punch. He waited. When she appeared, time stopped. She was the same shoes, the same way of walking. She saw him. She stopped, but she didn't say anything. And he understood, because in that silence there was everything. Everything she had never said. Everything he had never heard. Everything that now, finally, hurt. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just nodded, as if she were recognizing a page that had already been turned. He approached her carefully, more insecure than he had ever been. He tried to speak, but his voice failed him. He took the chain out of his pocket and showed it to her, his eyes brimming with tears. She looked at the blue stone, and for a brief moment something in her wavered, but it wasn't emotion. It was respect, for herself, for everything she felt alone, for everything she endured without an audience. "Why did you come here?" she asked, not harshly but firmly. He didn't know how to answer. He just shook his head as if asking for forgiveness, as if returning without knowing if there was still a door. She didn't let him in. She offered him a bench in the back. "Garden?" They sat side by side like intimate strangers. For a while all they could hear were the birds and the wind hitting the glass bells hanging on the balcony. He tried to explain. He tried to say that he regretted it, that he understood everything too late, but each word sounded too small compared to the silence she had created. "You loved me in secret and left me in the dark. Now do you want light?" she said, looking at the floor. He clutched the chain in his hand, not knowing what to. "To it I loved you with everything I had," he murmured. And she, still looking at the floor, replied, "Me too. The difference is that you could choose. I couldn't." He stayed. He asked for a room. He said he needed a few days. She didn't stop him. It was a hotel, after all. But she didn't come any closer. She kept up her routine. She walked down the hallway with a firm posture. She greeted people politely. And he, every day, felt more distant. Because now he was the one watching her without being seen. The one who noticed the way she arranged the napkins, how she smiled lightly at the guests, how she carried her weight with such grace. One late afternoon, he saw her sitting alone, sewing a hem of a sheet. He stood there, watching. She noticed. "Do you have something to say?" she asked. He hesitated. "I want to ask you something." She looked up. "Let me see you for who you are, not for who I was." She smiled for the first time. A tired smile. "Now you see. But it is no longer my job to teach you how to look." And there on that bench, with the sky changing colors and the bells still ringing, he understood. She didn't hate him. She had just freed herself. And loving in freedom wasn't about going back. It was about not needing any more. He stayed longer than he had planned. 3 days turned into a week, then 2. He invented meetings that didn't exist, postponed flights, turned off his cell phone for hours. He didn't say it out loud, but he knew it. He was trying to recover what he had never had the courage to experience. He watched her from afar, as if all he had to do was look at her to rekindle what silence had buried. But she was someone else. Not a bitter woman, not a vengeful woman, just a woman who had learned to live without him, and that was the part that hurt the most. One grey Saturday she needed help carrying a box of towels. He offered. They walked together to the storage room. No word about the past, but he couldn't resist. "Do you miss it?" She stopped. She didn't pretend not to understand. She looked at him with the calm of someone who has cried too much. "I miss who I was when I loved you." And she went back to work. He stood there, still, as if listening to his own sentence. Because that answer said it all. It wasn't him who was missed. It was the part of her that died when she loved him alone. One of the following nights, he saw her sitting in the garden with one of the elderly guests, helping him write a letter. The scene was simple, but it struck him like a gentle dagger. She was still love, even when she was no longer for him. And then he realized with a quiet pain that he had destroyed something sacred, not with violence, but with cowardice. And now there was nothing to fix, only to accept. He decided to leave without warning. He left the payment for the room, a short letter, and the little brown box on the reception counter. He wrote, "I don't want to ask you for anything else. I just want to thank you for being the only truth in my life. I carry the pain with honor, and I leave what is yours." In the box she placed the chain with the blue stone and the note she had left on the mirror, now crumpled by time, but intact. When she found the package, she didn't smile. She didn't cry. She put everything away in the same place where love used to live, in the bottom drawer, among the things that are not shown to others. But that night, she dreamed of him, not of the man who left, but of the boy who trembled when he touched her, who asked for coffee, who left notes between napkins. She dreamed of what almost was, and when she woke up, instead of pain, she felt a slight emptiness, like someone who accepts that certain stories don't need a happy ending. They just need peace. Months had passed since he left without saying goodbye, but she remembered the sound of suitcases on the sidewalk as if it had happened yesterday. She didn't see him go. She only knew he had gone because the receptionist handed her the letter with the box, and that gesture, even if simple, closed a cycle that she didn't know if she needed to end. She kept everything, not with hope, but with respect, for everything you felt, for everything that survived in silence. Life started moving again. The hotel underwent renovations, a new manager arrived, the uniforms changed. But she was still there, solid, calm, attentive. She was loved by the guests, respected by her colleagues, known as someone who always listened more than she spoke. She had a calming presence, a strength that came precisely from what she did not say. Those who paid close attention could see. There was a polite longing in her, an absence that did not demand space, but was there, and no one knew where it came from. On the other side of the state, he was still married, But he was no longer the same man. Little by little, he stopped smiling in photos, responding to emails on time, and occupying the spaces he once dominated. His wife noticed. His friends commented. But he didn't explain. Because how can you explain the absence of something that was never completely yours? How can you explain the constant presence of someone who only exists in the silence of your memory? One morning, while passing by a street market, he saw a woman selling silver chains. There was one with a blue stone, identical, or almost. He bought it, not to give to her, he no longer had that right, but to carry in his pocket, like someone who holds on to something they can no longer touch, like someone who accepts that there are mistakes that cannot be erased, they just have to be lived with. And every time he touched the chain with his fingers, he remembered the note. You deserve a beautiful beginning. Cruel irony, because he never knew how to start, only appear after the endings. And she didn't forget him either. But she learned to live with his absence, like someone learning to walk with a stone in their shoe. It bothered them, but it didn't stop them. Sometimes she would sit in the hotel garden at the end of the day and watch the sky change color. That was where he used to wait for her, even if without words. And in those moments, she didn't cry. She just closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Because she didn't hate. Because she didn't want revenge. Because true love, the one that hurt her, no longer required his presence to exist. It was by chance that she found out. She was cleaning the hallway when a lady staying at the hotel dropped the folded newspaper on the table. It fell open and his name jumped out like a vivid memory. It wasn't a headline, but a social note. Businessman and wife face public crisis after rumors of betrayal. She read it slowly, not out of curiosity, but because the name still hurt when it touched her skin. There was a photo, him thinner, with a closed expression, distant eyes, his wife by his side, with the tight smile of someone pretending not to see the crack. The text was dry. It said that the couple had stopped appearing in public. Nothing more. She remained silent. She didn't tell anyone. She simply kept the clipping in her apron pocket, as if she were collecting a piece of time. Later, in her room, she opened the drawer where her old things were, the chain, the note, the box. She put the folded newspaper in there too, all together, like pieces of a love that never came true. But she didn't smile. She didn't feel victory, because his suffering was no consolation. It was just an echo. In the following days, his face would not leave her mind, not because she missed him, but because she recognized him, because now, when she looked at that wounded man, she saw the same pain that she had once carried alone. Only she was late in seeing him, and that's why it hurt differently. Karma, maybe. But she didn't want revenge. She just wanted him to finally understand. On the other side of town, he was going through a cold, discreet divorce, full of clauses and lawyers. His wife didn't yell, it wasn't her style, but her eyes were tired. She knew she had never been loved completely, and for the first time he didn't try to fix it. He accepted her departure as if he were opening a door that was already broken. He moved to a smaller, quieter apartment. He took a few pieces of furniture, and the heaviest thing in his suitcase was a blue stone he kept among his shirts. He started cooking for himself, making his own coffee, cleaning the house, and, without realizing it, repeating her gestures, the ones he never thanked her for. One night, while making the bed, he took the sheet in both hands and calmly stretched it. He remembered her. He remembered the way she folded the corners with precision, as if she were placing her own heart there. And in that simple gesture he cried, for the first time, alone, in silence, in an empty room. Not because he wanted her back, but because he finally understood everything she had been, and he had ignored it. Time, when it passes slowly, reveals what hurried eyes never saw. He began to notice this in the details, in the way she folded the napkin and left a fold just like the one she made, in the habit of turning on a low light before going to sleep like she did in his room, in the small gestures that, without realizing it, he repeated every day, as if she, even though she was far away, was still shaping his routine. But now it was no longer passion. It was absence transformed into a lesson. He woke up early, drank coffee looking out the window, read newspapers with the constant feeling that everything was emptier. He had friends, but he no longer shared his soul. He had commitments, but no meaning. It was as if he lived a life of scraps, and each missing piece was her. Not for the woman he once wanted, but for everything she meant. For the generosity he didn't have, for the courage she had alone, for the presence he only recognized when he lost it. He began to write, not letters, not diaries, just random sentences on yellowed paper. You saw me when no one was looking. I pretended not to know you because I didn't know who I was. The shame was mine. The silence was yours. He didn't show it to anyone. He just kept it in a shoebox in the closet. It was as if he asked for forgiveness every day, even though he knew that forgiveness wouldn't change anything. On a cold Sunday, he decided to return to the city where she was, not to find her, not to reopen wounds, but to pass by, to sit on the same bench, to look at the hotel windows, to walk along the sidewalk where his footsteps echoed too late. He arrived late in the afternoon. The hotel was still the same, but she was not there. The new receptionist said she had moved out months before. She went to take care of her sick aunt, I think, or maybe she left to start over. He thanked her with a wave and walked away. He walked to the back. The garden remained. The glass bells still hung. He sat on the bench alone and stayed there for hours. No one recognized him, and he liked that. For the first time he was there without status, without excuses, without hiding anything. When the sky darkened, he took a folded sheet of paper from his pocket with one last sentence. If I could go back, I wouldn't hide you from myself anymore. He left the paper under the bench, not as a message to her, but as a reminder to himself that there was love, even if it failed. That night, he slept in the car and woke up to the sound of the wind blowing through the leaves. He smiled. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel guilty, only gratitude for having learned, even late, even after time had stopped giving anyone back. She now lived in a small, peaceful coastal town where time smelled of salt and the days ended in copper-colored silence. She rented a simple room at the back of a blue house where a widow lived who treated her sweetly. She looked after the small municipal library and, in the late afternoons, she drank jasmine tea sitting on the porch. It was a life without excesses but full of calm, and in that calm she found what she had never had: peace without surveillance, routine without fear, freedom without judgmental eyes. The library was almost always empty, but she liked that. She liked to walk among the shelves, organize the old books, and catalogue the donations. One day she found a forgotten copy of Unsent Love Letters. She read it right there, leaning against the window. And one of the sentences stuck. Love that is not said out loud also lives, even if it dies in silence. She closed the book carefully and sighed. Yes, she still felt. But now she was a different woman. She loved without any desire for return, without any desire for justice, without any rush to understand. One afternoon he received an envelope, no return address, just his name and the name of the city written in firm handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper with the sentence he had left on the hotel bench. If I could go back, I wouldn't hide you from myself anymore. She recognized the line. She sat down on the library steps and stayed there, looking at the paper as if reading from an ancient time. She didn't cry, but her eyes shone like when the truth arrives slowly and no longer hurts. In the following days, she didn't tell anyone, but something in her changed. She started writing too, not letters, just thoughts on loose sheets of paper. Things like, what was left unsaid dissolved into the right silence, or not all love needs an audience to be real. She kept everything in a wooden box, along with the blue stone chain and the note in the mirror. It was her private altar, her secret story, her collection of everything she loved without return. Meanwhile, he went on with his life with more dignity. He became more discreet, kinder, less urgent. The smaller house taught him to fit in with himself. The coffee was made calmly, the sheets were folded by himself, the silence was no longer a punishment, but a cure. He never looked for her again. Not because he didn't want to, but because he understood that to truly love is also to know how to let go. And so, far apart, without letters or reunions, the two continued. Connected by memories that did not require presence, only respect. Because certain loves do not ask for return. They only ask for recognition that they existed. It was a typical late afternoon in the small town, the kind where the wind comes before the rain, and the light from the sky seems to touch everything with a calm golden color. She had finished her shift at the library, carefully closing her books and organizing the last returns. On her way out, she passed through the central square, where she rarely stopped, but that day she felt like sitting on the bench near the bandstand. She had a book on her lap, and her hair tied up in a messy way. She was wearing the same old coat she had worn when she cleaned hallways that smelled of expensive disinfectant. But now there was peace in her shoulders, there was silence in her gestures, there was strength. As she read, she heard slow footsteps. She didn't look. She was used to not waiting for anyone. But, little by little, she felt a gaze. One of those that doesn't hurt, just touches lightly. She slowly turned her face. It was an old man. He was smiling at a child who was running around the pigeons. He wasn't looking at her. And maybe that's why she looked at him. There was tenderness there, and a slight tiredness in his eyes. When their gazes finally met, she felt something curious. It wasn't pain. It was recognition. He wasn't him, but he was someone. Someone who, for a few seconds, saw in her what she was, not what she was good for. A nod, a brief smile, and the man walked away with the child. She stood there, feeling her heart beat silently. Not because she was ready to love again, but because she understood something precious. She was alive, whole, and time had given her back something that no one could take away, not even him. When he got home that night, he opened the wooden box one last time. The chain with the blue stone still gleamed, the note from the mirror, the newspaper clipping, the scribbled thoughts. He took them all carefully and put them in an envelope. He sealed it with tape and wrote just one sentence on the front. "Thank you for teaching me to see what I deserve." The next day, he left the envelope in the mail, with no return address, no name. It was a gesture to himself, a full stop without a fuss, a goodbye without the need for a reply. A few days later, he received the envelope. He knew who it was from before he even opened it. He read it slowly, sitting in the same chair where he had once had coffee alone. He smiled with tears in his eyes, not because he wanted to go back in time, but because he understood, finally, that time does not go back, but teaches. And in that smile there was relief, because now he knew. He had loved. Yes, late, badly, with fear. But he had loved, and that also transformed him. At her house that same night, it rained, and for the first time in many years, she danced barefoot on the porch, without music, without rushing, with her eyes closed. The rain hit her face and she smiled as if she knew the love she gave, and even without return, was not in vain, because it changed a man and saved herself. If this story touched your heart in any way, leave your like now. This shows us that this kind of narrative needs to continue. Subscribe to the channel so as not to miss the next stories that move in silence, with truths that no one tells. And comment below. True love doesn't have to be loud. I will read each one. Now, watch the video that is appearing on the screen. It is another intense story, full of emotion and twists which perhaps speaks to you too.